The sound came first, a metallic rattle that shook through the humid summer air as the elevated train passed overhead. Below, Chicago's Maxwell Street Market was winding down for the day, vendors folding card tables and loading unsold merchandise into battered vans. July 17th, 1982. The mercury had hit 91 degrees by noon, and now at 6:17 p.m., the asphalt still radiated heat in visible waves. Tommy DeLuca wiped sweat from his brow with his shirt sleeve, careful not to crease the manila envelope tucked under his arm. 23 years old, with dark hair combed back and a blue Bulls t-shirt that hung loose on his lean frame, he moved with purpose through the thinning crowd. Tommy wasn't a market vendor. He was a runner, a collector and courier of cash for Vincent Calabrese, a mid-level bookie whose territory covered 3 South Side neighborhoods. The city pulsed around him, indifferent to his mission. 2 teenagers on a nearby corner shared a cigarette, their laughter cutting through the ambient noise. A woman with a toddler clutching her leg haggled over the price of tomatoes at the last produce stand still open. The smell of grilled onions and sausage lingered in the air, mixing with exhaust fumes and the metallic scent of an approaching summer storm. Tommy had grown up with these smells, these sounds, the soundtrack of a Chicago summer that felt eternal and fleeting all at once. "Make the pickup at Sal's stand by 6, Calabrese had instructed earlier that afternoon, his voice muffled through the receiver of the payphone outside Jimbo's Liquors. "Straight there, straight back. Sox are playing Baltimore tonight. Big money coming in." Tommy had nodded, though no one could see him. He'd been running for Calabrese for 18 months, long enough to learn the routes, recognize the regulars, and understand the unwritten rules. Never deviate, never look in the envelope, never be late. The job wasn't complicated, but it kept Tommy in cash while he figured out what came next. His father, a union electrician for 30 years, wanted him to apply for an apprenticeship. Good benefits, pension, respect, he'd say over Sunday dinners, his calloused hands cutting through pot roast. Tommy's mother would nod silently, her eyes fixed on her only son with a mixture of hope and worry. She'd never said it outright, but Tommy knew she sensed something about his work for Calabrese wasn't right. The last slant of sunlight caught on the chrome bumpers of cars parked along Halsted Street as Tommy passed Sal's hot dog stand, now closed and locked for the day. The pickup had gone smoothly. No words exchanged, just a nod and the envelope sliding across a countertop while Sal wrapped a Polish for another customer. Standard procedure. As Tommy walked, his mind drifted to Elaine and the night ahead. 8 months together. And he still got nervous before seeing her, a pleasant flutter in his stomach that made him feel like a kid again. She was studying nursing at UIC, working nights at Rush Hospital to pay tuition, smart, determined, beautiful, out of his league, as his buddies constantly reminded him. Yet somehow she'd chosen him. Last week, after a shift at the hospital, she'd surprised him with Sox tickets for his birthday. "Bleacher seats," she'd said proudly, presenting the envelope with a flourish. "I saved up 3 paychecks." Tommy had kissed her then, wondering what he'd done to deserve someone who saw more in him than he saw in himself. 2 blocks from the market, Tommy paused at the corner of 14th and Union. To his left stretched the main thoroughfare, still busy with traffic and pedestrians making their way to bars or home for dinner. To his right, a narrow service alley offered a shortcut that would shave 5 minutes off his walk back to Calabrese's bar on Canal Street. Tommy checked his watch. 6:24 p.m. He'd promised his girlfriend Elaine he'd pick her up by 8 for the Sox game. They had bleacher seats, her birthday present to him last week. If he took the alley, he could drop the money with Calabrese, shower at his apartment on Princeton Avenue, and still have time to grab flowers for Elaine on the way. He fingered the small velvet box in his pocket, another reason for his hurry. The ring wasn't much, just a simple band with a small diamond that had cost him 6 weeks of saving. But tonight felt right. 7th inning stretch, her favorite part of the game. He'd ask her then, with the crowd on its feet and the Chicago skyline lit up behind the outfield. Decision made, he turned right. The service alley narrowed between the brick walls of a meatpacking warehouse and the loading dock of a wholesale grocer. Dumpsters cast long shadows across broken concrete. The sounds of Halstead Street faded with each step, replaced by the buzz of a faulty transformer on a utility pole and the distant wail of a siren somewhere to the north. The alley smelled of rotting produce and motor oil, the ground slick with unknown substances that Tommy didn't care to identify. Graffiti covered the lower portions of the brick walls, gang tags, declarations of love, obscenities in multiple languages. A cat darted from behind a stack of wooden pallets, startling him. Tommy never heard the footsteps behind him. 2 shots echoed between the brick walls. The first caught Tommy in the back, spinning him around as he fell. The second hit his chest as he landed, the manila envelope still clutched in his hand. His eyes, wide with shock and confusion, registered a hooded figure moving toward him, face obscured by shadow. In those final moments, as blood pooled beneath him and his vision began to narrow, Tommy's thoughts weren't of the envelope or the money or even the pain spreading through his chest. They were of Elaine waiting at her apartment, checking her watch, wondering why he was late, of the ring in his pocket that would never make it onto her finger, of his mother's warnings and his father's disappointed sighs. The figure knelt, pried the envelope from Tommy's fingers with gloved hands, then checked both ends of the alley before disappearing around the corner toward the Dan Ryan Expressway. At 6:31 p.m., as the White Sox were taking the field at Comiskey Park 3 miles south, Ellie Martinez stepped into the alley to dump a bucket of mop water from the back of her father's bodega. She froze at the sight of Tommy's body, dropped the bucket with a clatter, and ran inside screaming for her father to call the police. The water from her bucket mingled with Tommy's blood, creating pale pink rivulets that followed the cracks in the concrete toward a rusted drain. Above, thunder rumbled as the promised storm finally rolled in from the lake, the first fat drops of rain beginning to fall on the still warm body of Thomas Anthony DeLuca, whose future had just been stolen for the contents of a manila envelope. "What have we got?" Detective Ray Kowalski slammed the door of his unmarked Caprice, the metallic thunk echoing in the alley now illuminated by the rotating lights of 2 squad cars. Rain pelted his trench coat as he ducked under the yellow crime scene tape, nodding to the uniformed officer standing guard. Officer Pete Donovan looked up from his notepad, water dripping from the brim of his cap. Male victim, multiple GSWs. Hispanic female from the grocery found him around 6:30. Me's on the way. Kowalski crouched beside the body, careful to avoid the spreading pool of blood now diluted by rainwater. ID? Thomas DeLuca, 23. Donovan flipped open a wallet retrieved from the victim's back pocket. Address on Princeton. Nothing taken except whatever was in a manila envelope witness says he was carrying. Kowalski's weathered face tightened. At 42, with 15 years on the force and the last 7 in homicide, he had developed instincts about scenes like this. The rain would wash away evidence, complicate the investigation, but he already knew what they were dealing with. "This wasn't random," he muttered. "Sir?" Donovan leaned closer, rain cascading off his cap. 2 shots, professional placement. Kowalski pointed to the entry wounds. Envelope taken, wallet left behind. This wasn't a kid looking for drinking money. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the alley in stark white light. Kowalski noticed something glinting near the victim's hand. A small velvet box, partially open, its contents spilled onto the wet pavement. A diamond ring, modest but unmistakable, caught the blue and red pulses from the squad cars. "Looks like our Vic had plans tonight," Kowalski said quietly, instructing a crime scene tech to bag the ring as evidence. He made a mental note to follow up with the girlfriend. Such notifications were the worst part of the job, but sometimes yielded crucial information. A uniformed officer approached from the street end of the alley, hunched against the downpour. "Detective? We've got a witness who might have seen something. Old man who lives above the hardware store on the corner." The witness, Walter Nowak, 68, Korean War veteran with thick glasses and hands gnarled by arthritis, sat on a folding chair behind the hardware store, a cigarette trembling between his fingers. The overhang protected him from the worst of the rain, but his thin sweater was already damp at the shoulders. "I heard the shots," he said, his voice barely audible above the ambient noise of rainfall and city traffic. "Looked out my window, saw somebody running, getting into a car. Dark Buick, I think. Couldn't see the plates." "Could you identify the person you saw?" Kowalski asked, producing a small notebook from his inner pocket. The pages curled slightly from the humidity. Nowak took a long drag on his cigarette, then shook his head. "Didn't see much. Dark clothes, hood up, even with my glasses." He tapped the thick lenses. "These days, I don't see so good." Kowalski nodded, jotting notes in his small, leather-bound notebook. "Anything else, Mr. Nowak? Anything unusual you remember?" The old man hesitated, his rheumy eyes narrowing in concentration. The cigarette had burned down to his yellowed fingers, but he seemed not to notice. "The car, it had a dent, right rear fender. Big one, like somebody backed into a pole." "Dark Buick, dented right rear fender," Kowalski repeated, underlining the details twice. It wasn't much, but in a case like this, no witnesses to the actual shooting, a professional hit by the looks of it, any detail could be the thread that unraveled the whole thing. "And one more thing," Nowak added, crushing his cigarette under a worn slipper. "The runner. I've seen him before. Passes by regular, always carrying something, always in a hurry. I figured he worked for someone, if you know what I mean." The old man tapped the side of his nose meaningfully. By 10 p.m., the body had been removed, the scene photographed and processed. Detective Kowalski stood alone in the alley, now silent, except for the distant rattle of the L train and the steady drip of water from fire escapes and gutters. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a glistening sheen on every surface and the clean, momentarily fresh smell that follows a summer storm. The initial canvas had yielded little more than Nowak's statement. No one had seen the shooting. The dark Buick was nowhere to be found, and the only fingerprints recovered belonged to the victim. The gun had not been recovered. No surprise there. Professional hits didn't leave weapons behind. Back at the station, Kowalski began assembling the case file. Thomas DeLuca, no priors, worked as a bartender at Jimbo's Liquors, according to his employment records. A call to the number listed for his emergency contact went unanswered. His girlfriend, Elaine Bradshaw, was still at Comiskey Park, waiting for a date who would never arrive. Kowalski lit a cigarette, ignoring the no smoking sign recently installed by the new captain. The precinct was quiet at this hour, most detectives either at home or working other cases. The rhythmic click of the wall clock punctuated the silence as he spread crime scene photos across his desk, searching for something, anything they might have missed. Tomorrow would bring more work. Interviewing DeLuca's family and girlfriend, checking with informants about Calabresi's operations, putting out an APB on the Buick. But tonight all Kowalski had was a dead young man, a dented car, and a handful of rain-soaked notes. At the bottom of a preliminary report form, Kowalski scribbled a note, "Victim possibly connected to Vincent Calabresi operations." He circled it twice, then closed the folder. Tomorrow, he'd start pulling threads. In the morgue across town, Tommy DeLuca's body lay under harsh fluorescent lights, a sheet drawn up to his chin. The medical examiner had already determined cause of death, 2 gunshot wounds from a .38 caliber weapon fired at close range. Time of death, approximately 6:30 p.m. An attendant had carefully placed Tommy's personal effects in a plastic bag for his family to collect: wallet, keys, watch, and a small velvet box containing a diamond ring that would never be worn. Outside, Chicago continued its summer rhythms. The White Sox lost to Baltimore 5-3. Trains rattled overhead. Heat lightning flashed across the lake. In an apartment on the south side, Elaine Bradshaw finally returned home from Comiskey Park, her calls to Tommy's phone still unanswered. And somewhere in the city, a killer counted cash from a blood-stained envelope, while a damaged Buick cooled in a garage that wouldn't remain secret for long. The first pieces of a 40-year puzzle had been set on the board. Justice for Tommy DeLuca would come, but not in the next day or month or even year. It would arrive decades later, when technology caught up with evidence, when databases connected dots across generations, and when one detective's stubborn notations in a case file found their way into the hands of someone who refused to let cold cases freeze solid. For now, though, Tommy's file was just one more in a growing stack on Kowalski's desk, its manila folder not unlike the one that had contained the day's collection money. The envelope that had cost a young man his life on a hot July evening when Chicago had better things to do than notice another body in an alley. March 15, 2022. Rain pelted the windows of the Chicago Police Department's cold case unit, located in the basement of the 3rd District Station. The space was utilitarian, fluorescent lighting, drop ceiling with water stains, and rows of metal filing cabinets that had outlasted generations of detectives. The air smelled of coffee, dust, and the faint mustiness that permeated buildings built before World War II. Detective Sofia Rodriguez sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of manila folders. At 36, with 12 years on the force and the last 3 in cold case, she had developed a reputation for persistence bordering on obsession. Her colleagues called her the archaeologist behind her back, a nod to her methodical approach to excavating long-buried evidence. The DeLuca homicide file lay open before her. She'd pulled it 2 weeks ago as part of a systematic review of unsolved cases from the early 1980s, looking for those that might benefit from advances in forensic technology. Most were dead ends, evidence degraded, witnesses deceased, leads exhausted, but something about this one had caught her attention. Victim possibly connected to Vincent Calabrese operations, she read aloud, tracing her finger along the note scribbled at the bottom of a yellowed report form. The handwriting was neat but hurried, the kind made by someone working late, trying to document a hunch before heading home. Detective Ray Kowalski's signature was at the bottom, the ink faded to a pale blue-gray. Kowalski had died in 2010, lung cancer, according to department records. He'd never closed the DeLuca case, but he'd kept at it longer than most. The file contained follow-up reports spanning 7 years, each more sparse than the last as leads dried up and newer, more pressing cases demanded attention. Rodriguez sipped her coffee, grimacing at the bitter, overbrewed taste, and continued flipping through the file. The crime scene photos were stark black and white, showing the body of Thomas DeLuca splayed in an alley, blood pooling beneath him. 2 gunshot wounds, one to the back, one to the chest. Professional work. "Thinking about the DeLuca case again?" Lieutenant Frank Chen asked, leaning against the doorframe of her office. At 58, with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perched on his nose, Chen had the weary patience of a man who'd seen decades of Chicago's worst offerings. Rodriguez nodded. "Something's not adding up." Kowalski thought it was connected to Vincent Calabrese's bookmaking operation, but he couldn't prove it. No witnesses would talk. The Buick was never found. Calabrese died in county lockup in '97, Chen reminded her. Whatever secrets he had, he took them with him. "I know, but look at this." Rodriguez gestured to a stack of evidence logs. They recovered a partial palm print from the envelope the victim was carrying. Too smudged for identification in '82, but I'm wondering if our new digital enhancement software could pull something usable. Chen's eyebrows rose. 40 years later, that's a long shot. "Long shots are all we've got with these cases," she replied. "Besides, I found something interesting. In 1994, they arrested a guy named Michael Donato for illegal gambling. Guess who he worked for before Calabrese went down?" "Let me guess. Vincent Calabrese." Rodriguez tapped a mugshot in the file. "Donato was picked up at least twice for questioning in the DeLuca case, but he had an alibi both times. His cousin verified he was at a family dinner in Cicero." "And you don't buy it?" She shook her head. "Family alibis are worth the paper they're written on. Plus, there's this." She pulled out a DMV record. "Donato registered a 1978 Buick Regal 3 months before the murder, sold it 6 weeks after." Chen straightened. His interest peaked. "The witness mentioned a Buick. with a dented right rear fender. Rodriguez flipped to another page, a traffic citation issued to Donato 2 weeks before the murder. Improper backing, damaged city property. Hit a fire hydrant on Wabash. A slow smile spread across Chen's face. You think our digital guys can pull something from that palm print? Only one way to find out. The Forensic Technology Center occupied the entire 3rd floor of the new police headquarters building downtown. Unlike the basement cold case office, this space was all gleaming surfaces and state-of-the-art equipment, a testament to the department's commitment to modern crime-solving techniques. Dr. Marcus Patel, the center's director, peered at his computer screen, manipulating the scan of the partial palm print recovered from Tommy DeLuca's envelope in 1982. The original evidence had been carefully preserved in the department's evidence locker, a small miracle in itself, given how many old cases had seen evidence lost, damaged, or destroyed over the decades. "This is fascinating," Patel murmured, more to himself than to Rodriguez, who stood behind him. "The original investigators did a good job preserving this. See how they used cellophane tape to lift it from the paper envelope? Old school, but effective." Rodriguez leaned closer. "Can you get anything usable?" "Patience, detective." Patel's fingers flew across the keyboard, applying various filters and enhancement algorithms to the scanned image. The original was too smudged for traditional ridge counting and comparison in 1982. But our software can isolate pattern probabilities and enhance contrast far beyond what was possible then. On the screen, the blurry smudge gradually transformed, not into a crystal-clear print, but into something with distinct patterns and identifiable features. "There," Patel said, pointing to the screen. "It's not perfect, but it's enough for our AI to run a comparison against the database. The system will look for similar pattern distributions rather than exact matches." "How long will that take?" Rodriguez asked. "For a partial this degraded? At least 24 hours. The system has to calculate probability scores for millions of potential matches." He looked up at her. "I'll call you if we get a hit." Rodriguez spent the next day interviewing former associates of Vincent Calabresi who were still alive and willing to talk. Most were elderly now, their memories of 1982 clouded by time and subsequent events. Some pretended not to remember Tommy DeLuca at all. Others recalled him vaguely as one of Vinny's boys. None admitted to knowing anything about his death. By late afternoon, she found herself in the Bridgeport neighborhood, sitting across from Sal Martino, former owner of the hot dog stand, where Tommy had made his final pickup. Now 81, Martino lived in a tidy bungalow with his daughter and her family. His hands trembled with Parkinson's as he sipped the coffee Rodriguez had declined. "Sure I remember Tommy," Martino said, his voice gravelly from decades of cigarettes. "Good kid, polite, always on time." He shook his head sadly. "Wasn't surprised when I heard what happened, though. Running for Calabresi was dangerous work." "Did you see him that day, July 17th, 1982? Martino nodded slowly. "He came by the stand around 6, picked up the envelope like usual. No words exchanged. That was how Vinny wanted it. Just business." "Did you notice anyone watching him? Anyone following him when he left?" The old man's eyes narrowed in concentration. "There was a guy sat at the counter most of the afternoon. Had a coffee, ordered a Polish, but barely touched it. Left right after Tommy." He shrugged apologetically. "Never thought much about it until now." "Could you describe him?" "Average height, dark hair, slicked back, 30-ish. Wore a members-only jacket, brown, I think." Martino hesitated. "Had a scar on his right hand between the thumb and finger, like a burn mark." Rodriguez felt a flutter of excitement. This detail, the scar, had never appeared in the original case files. "Would you recognize him if you saw a photo?" Martino tilted his head non-committally. "Maybe. It was a long time ago." Rodriguez pulled out a manila folder containing 6 mugshots, including Michael Donato's. She laid them on the coffee table, careful to arrange them randomly. "Take your time." The old man studied the photos, his gnarled finger hovering over each one before moving to the next. When he reached Donato's mugshot, his hand paused. This could be him. The hair's different, but the eyes... He tapped the photo. Cold, like a shark. You're sure? As sure as I can be after 40 years. Martino leaned back in his chair. Is that the guy who did it? We're not certain yet, Rodriguez replied carefully. But you've been very helpful, Mr. Martino. As she was leaving, Martino called after her. Detective? Tommy was a good kid. He didn't deserve what happened to him. No, Rodriguez agreed. He didn't. Her phone rang at 7:18 the next morning. Rodriguez was already awake, sipping coffee at her kitchen counter while reviewing her notes from the Martino interview. Rodriguez, she answered. It's Patel. You need to see this. 20 minutes later, she stood in the Forensic Technology Center, staring at a split-screen display. On the left was the enhanced palm print from Tommy DeLuca's envelope. On the right was a known print taken during a 1994 booking. 96% probability match, Patel said, his voice tight with excitement. That's well above our threshold for court admissibility. Rodriguez leaned closer, reading the name beneath the comparison print. Michael Donato, arrested in 94 for illegal gambling and again in 99 for assault, Patel confirmed. His prints have been in the system for decades, but without the enhancement algorithms, the partial from the DeLuca case was too degraded for a match. This puts him at the crime scene, Rodriguez said, her mind racing. Contradicts his alibi. Not necessarily, Patel cautioned. It proves he handled the envelope, not that he killed DeLuca. Defense could argue he touched it earlier that day, or even the day before. Rodriguez nodded, understanding the limitations. But it's enough for a warrant, and maybe enough to shake his confidence if we bring him in for questioning. She pulled out her phone, dialing Chen. Lieutenant, we've got a match on the DeLuca case. Michael Donato. She paused, listening. Yes, sir. I'll need a team to pick him up. Another pause. Current address shows him in a nursing home in Skokie. Stage 4 lung cancer, according to his medical records. Rodriguez ended the call, her expression grim but determined. Donato's dying. This might be our last chance to close this. The Sunset Haven Care Facility sat on 3 manicured acres in Skokie, its brick facade and large windows more reminiscent of a college dormitory than a place where people came to die. Rodriguez parked her unmarked car in the visitor's lot, noting the expensive vehicles around her, family members spending Sunday afternoon with elderly relatives. The lobby smelled of antiseptic and artificial flowers. A receptionist with a practiced smile directed Rodriguez to room 214 after checking her credentials. Mr. Donato doesn't get many visitors, she remarked, just his niece every few weeks. Room 214 was at the end of a long hallway lined with artwork clearly chosen for its inoffensiveness, watercolor landscapes and still lifes in pastel hues. The door was partially open. Rodriguez knocked gently, then entered. Michael Donato barely resembled his mugshot from 1994. Cancer and time had hollowed his cheeks and thinned his once thick hair to white wisps. Oxygen tubing ran from his nostrils to a tank beside the bed. His eyes, though, those were unchanged, dark, alert, calculating. The eyes of a man who had seen and done things that couldn't be taken back. Michael Donato, Rodriguez asked, showing her badge. I'm Detective Sofia Rodriguez, Chicago Police Department. Donato's gaze flicked to the badge, then back to her face. If you're selling tickets to the policeman's ball, I'm afraid I won't be dancing much these days. His voice was raspy, but surprisingly strong. Rodriguez pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down. I'm here about Thomas DeLuca, July 17th, 1982. If the name meant anything to Donato, his face didn't show it. Don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. Rodriguez opened a folder containing the case photos. Thomas DeLuca, 23, shot twice in an alley off Union Street. He was carrying an envelope of cash for Vincent Calabresi. She paused, watching Donato's face. An envelope that had your palm print on it. For a moment, just a flicker, something passed across Donato's features. Surprise, perhaps, or resignation. Then the mask returned. Must be a mistake. I never touched any envelope. Science says otherwise. Rodriguez placed the printout from the Forensic Technology Center on his lap tray. 96% match. And we have a witness who places you at Sal Martino's stand the day of the murder, watching DeLuca make the pickup. You followed him into that alley. Donato stared at the printout, then pushed it away. That won't hold up in court. Some computer program finding a match on a 40-year-old smudge? Please. You're right, Rodriguez conceded. It might not be enough for a conviction, but we also have the Buick with the dented rear fender, the one you sold 6 weeks after the murder, the one a witness saw leaving the scene. Coincidence. A lot of coincidences, Mr. Donato. Rodriguez leaned forward. Look, I don't expect a full confession, but I know you're sick. The doctors say you have months, maybe weeks. This might be your last chance to clear the slate. Donato's laugh turned into a coughing fit. When it subsided, he fixed Rodriguez with a cold stare. You think I care about clearing the slate? At my age with this? He gestured to the oxygen tank. God and I settled our accounts long ago. Rodriguez changed tactics. What about Tommy's family? His girlfriend was waiting for him at a Sox game that night. He had a ring in his pocket. He was going to propose. Sad story. Write it up for the Tribune. His mother died, never knowing who killed her son. His father followed 5 years later. Rodriguez kept her voice level, non-accusatory. All these years, they thought it was a random robbery, some junkie desperate for cash. But it wasn't, was it? It was business. Calabresi's business. Donato's eyes narrowed slightly. If you know so much, why are you here? Because I want to understand why, and I want to close this file properly. For Tommy. For nearly a minute, Donato was silent, his gaze fixed on the window where late afternoon sunlight streamed in. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. You know about Calabresi's operation? Rodriguez nodded. He ran books on most of the South Side, used runners to collect and deliver cash. And you know what happens to runners who skim? They get replaced, Rodriguez answered carefully. Donato's thin lips curved in a humorless smile. If they're lucky, he coughed again, reaching for a glass of water on his nightstand. DeLuca was skimming. Not much. 50 here, 100 there. But Calabresi noticed. Books weren't balancing. So he sent you to follow Tommy. To watch him, Donato corrected. See if he was making unauthorized stops, meeting anyone he shouldn't be. And was he? Donato shook his head. Kid was clean as far as I could tell, made his pickups, delivered the envelopes. But that day, he trailed off, his gaze growing distant. What happened that day, Michael? The old man sighed heavily. I watched him at Sal's, saw the exchange, but when he left, he did something different. Stepped into a doorway, opened the envelope, took some cash out, put it in his pocket. You're sure? Saw it with my own eyes. Donato's voice hardened. In our business, that's a death sentence. You don't steal from Vinnie Calabresi, so you followed him into the alley. Donato was quiet again, the only sound the soft hiss of oxygen from his tank. Didn't mean for it to happen there, he said finally. Was going to follow him home, handle it privately, but he took that shortcut and the alley was empty. Rodriguez felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. You shot him. Twice. First one in the back, he turned as he fell. Second one to make sure. Donato's clinical description was more disturbing than any emotional confession could have been. Took the envelope, counted the money later. He'd pocketed 300, probably for the ring you mentioned. The same ring that was found next to his body, Rodriguez confirmed. He wasn't skimming for himself, Michael. He was saving to get married. Something flickered in Donato's eyes, not quite remorse, but perhaps the recognition of a tragic irony. Doesn't matter now, does it? Calabresi wanted the books balanced. I balanced them. Did Calabresi order the hit specifically? Donato shook his head. Not in so many words. He just said, take care of our problem. In our world, that was enough. Rodriguez made notes, recording the confession that had eluded investigators for 4 decades. And the Buick, the one with the dented fender, sold it after. Too recognizable. That old man in the window, I saw him looking. Knew he'd remember the car. Walter Nowak, Rodriguez supplied. He died in 1998. Donato nodded absently. Smart old guy. Noticed details. Rodriguez closed her notebook. I'll need you to make a formal statement. I can arrange for a stenographer to come here tomorrow. Why bother? Donato gestured to himself, the hospital bed, the oxygen tank, his wasted frame. I'll be dead before any trial. We both know that. It's not about punishing you anymore, Rodriguez explained. It's about closing the case, giving Tommy's family and friends answers, setting the record straight. Donato studied her for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. All right, I'll make your statement. Not like I've got much else to do these days. As Rodriguez stood to leave, Donato spoke again. Detective, that night after, I went to a bar in Bridgeport, drank until closing. First and only time I ever did that after a job. He looked directly at her. Does that count for anything? That at least I felt something? Rodriguez held his gaze. That's not for me to say, Mr. Donato. Outside in the parking lot, as dusk settled over Skokie and the first stars appeared in the eastern sky, Rodriguez called Chen. We've got a confession, she said simply. Full as we're going to get. He admits to following DeLuca, shooting him in the alley, taking the money. Says Calabresi suspected DeLuca was skimming. Chen let out a low whistle. After 40 years. Damn. There's more. Rodriguez continued. DeLuca wasn't skimming for himself. The money he took from that last envelope, Donato says it was $300. He was saving for an engagement ring. Ah, the same ring found at the scene, Chen said, understanding immediately. Exactly. He died because he was planning to propose, Lieutenant. All these years the case was filed as a robbery homicide related to Calabresi's operations. But it wasn't just business, it was a tragic mistake. Good work, Rodriguez. Come in tomorrow. We'll take Donato's formal statement and close the file. As she drove back to Chicago, the city's skyline glittering against the darkening sky, Rodriguez thought about Tommy DeLuca, a young man whose future had been stolen because of a misunderstanding, about Elaine Bradshaw, waiting at Comiskey Park for a boyfriend who never arrived, about Detective Kowalski, who had kept the case open long after others would have moved on. Justice had finally been served, not with dramatics or revelations, but with persistence, technology, and the steady accumulation of evidence across decades. The loose threads had knotted at last, creating a complete picture of what had happened that July evening in 1982. Tomorrow, she would call Tommy's niece, the woman mentioned in the file who had kept every newspaper clipping in a shoebox. She would tell her that her uncle's case was finally closed, the mystery solved. It wouldn't bring Tommy back or erase 40 years of uncertainty, but perhaps it would provide something almost as valuable, the truth. Michael Donato died this morning at 4:17 a.m. Hospice nurse said he went peacefully. Lieutenant Chen delivered the news as Rodriguez entered the precinct, coffee in hand, the following morning. She paused mid-step, absorbing the information. Before or after giving his statement, she asked, already knowing the answer. Before. They called for a priest around 2 a.m. He never regained consciousness. Rodriguez set her coffee down on a nearby desk, untouched. So we have my notes from yesterday's conversation, but no formal confession. Afraid so. Chen's expression was sympathetic, but pragmatic. You know how this works, Rodriguez. Without an official statement, the DA won't officially close the case. But we know he did it, Rodriguez protested, following Chen into his office. We have the palm print match, the witness from the hot dog stand, the car connection, and he confessed to me, gave details only the killer would know. Inadmissible hearsay without documentation. Chen sat heavily in his chair, rubbing his temples. I believe you. The department believes you, but for official closure, we need something more. Rodriguez leaned against the doorframe, frustration evident in the tight line of her shoulders. 40 years, Lieutenant. Tommy DeLuca's family deserves resolution. Chen nodded thoughtfully. There might be another angle. Donato mentioned that Calabresi suspected DeLuca of skimming, that the books weren't balancing. Right. So there must have been records. Calabrese was meticulous about his operation, had to be to avoid RICO charges for so long. Chen pulled a folder from his desk. When they finally got him in '92, they seized a storage unit full of ledgers, receipts, notes. Most of it was entered into evidence for his trial, then archived. Rodriguez straightened. You think Calabrese's records might corroborate Donato's confession? Worth a look. The evidence would be in the federal repository by now. Chen scribbled an authorization on department letterhead. This should get you access. Take what you need, but be back by Friday. The chief wants this wrapped before the quarterly review. The Federal Evidence Repository occupied a nondescript building in the industrial district, its exterior giving no hint of the thousands of criminal cases archived within its climate-controlled interior. Rodriguez presented her credentials and Chen's authorization to a bored-looking clerk who barely looked up from his computer. Calabrese, Vincent, 1992 RICO case. The clerk typed the information, then frowned at his screen. That's a lot of boxes. 47, to be exact. Rodriguez's heart sank. I need to see all of them. Sign here. He pushed a digital tablet toward her. Room 12B down the hall. I'll have the boxes brought in. Coffee machines broken, by the way. Room 12B was spare. A metal table, 4 chairs, and harsh fluorescent lighting that hummed intermittently. Rodriguez set up her laptop and notepad, preparing for hours of methodical review. She knew what she was looking for: any mention of Thomas DeLuca, discrepancies in collections, notes about suspected skimming, or Donato's role in balancing the books. The first dolly of boxes arrived 20 minutes later, pushed by a young man in repository uniform. First 10, he announced, unloading them onto the table. Rest will come as requested. Call extension 218 when you need more. Box 1 contained financial ledgers from 1987-1990, too late to be relevant. Box 2 held personnel records, names, addresses, roles within the organization, payment schedules. Rodriguez scanned for DeLuca's name, but found nothing. Boxes 3 through 7 yielded similar disappointments. Tax forms, mostly fabricated, property records, and gambling sheets from the late 1980s. By noon, Rodriguez had worked through 15 boxes with nothing to show for her efforts. She rubbed her eyes, feeling the strain of reading faded entries in Calabrese's cramped handwriting. The room's fluorescent light seemed to intensify her growing headache. Box 16 contained something different, a series of small notebooks, each labeled with a year and a district. She pulled out the one marked 1982 South Side and began flipping through pages of entries. Each page detailed dates, locations, collectors, and amounts. The entries were coded, names replaced by initials or numbers, but clearly documented Calabrese's bookmaking operation throughout the South Side neighborhoods. On page 47, Rodriguez found what she was looking for, a series of entries for TD running from January through July 1982. The entries showed collection amounts, dates, and locations, along with a column labeled Verified. Most entries had check marks in this column, but several from June and July had question marks instead. A note in the margin of the July 10th entry caught her attention. TD down 150, Verify count. July 17th, the day of the murder, had a final entry. TD terminated, MD to balance. 3B recovered. Rodriguez's pulse quickened. There it was, in black and white. DeLuca, TD terminated. Donato, MD assigned to balance. And $300, 3B, recovered. The evidence corroborated Donato's confession perfectly. She photographed the pages with her phone, then continued searching. Box 17 contained more notebooks, including one labeled Personnel, Active, Inactive. Inside, she found entries for dozens of people who had worked for Calabrese over the years. Under D, she located an entry for DeLuca, Thomas A. The entry included his address, phone number, role, runner, S-side, start date, 1/15/81, and end date, 7/17/82. A single word was written next to the end date, terminated. Under D, she also found Donato Michael V., and whose roles were listed as collections and enforcement. A note indicated he had been with the organization since 1975. 2 boxes later, Rodriguez discovered a thin file labeled Special Expenditures. Inside were records of unusual payments, bribes to officials, hush money to witnesses, and payouts for services rendered. An entry from July 18, 1982, showed a payment of $2,000 to MD for problem resolution, TD situation. By 5 p.m., Rodriguez had examined 32 boxes. Her eyes burned, her back ached, and her notepad was filled with references that connected Donato to DeLuca's murder. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Calabresi had suspected DeLuca of skimming, assigned Donato to deal with the problem, and paid him afterward. She called Chen from the repository. "Found it," she said without preamble. "Calabresi's records confirm everything Donato told me. Ledger entries showing the suspected skimming, a note about DeLuca being terminated the day of the murder, and a payment to Donato the next day for problem resolution." "That's good work," Chen replied. "But will it be enough for the DA? Combined with the palm print match and the witness statement from Martino, it should be. These records establish motive and connect Donato directly to the murder. Get it all documented and bring it in. I'll call the DA's office." Assistant District Attorney Valerie Nichols was exactly as Rodriguez had expected, sharp, skeptical, and unwilling to officially close a case without ironclad evidence. She reviewed the materials at her desk, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. "Let me understand the sequence," Nichols said, setting down her pen. "Vincent Calabresi, deceased, ran a bookmaking operation in the early 1980s. Thomas DeLuca worked for him as a runner. Calabresi suspected DeLuca of skimming from collections. He assigned Michael Donato, also now deceased, to investigate and resolve the situation. On July 17, 1982, Donato followed DeLuca, observed him taking money from an envelope, and shot him in an alley. Calabresi's records show a payment to Donato the next day for problem resolution." "That's correct," Rodriguez confirmed. "And you believe, based on what Donato told you before he died, that DeLuca wasn't actually skimming for personal gain, but was saving for an engagement ring?" "Yes. The ring was found at the crime scene, still in his pocket." Nichols tapped her fingers on the desk. "It's compelling, Detective, but without Donato's sworn statement, we can't officially attribute the murder to him." "Ms. Nichols, we have physical evidence linking Donato to the crime scene, his palm print on the envelope. We have a witness who places him at the location where DeLuca made his final pickup. We have Calabresi's own records documenting the sequence of events, and we have Donato's verbal confession, which I documented in my case notes. Verbal confession to a detective without counsel present, without recording, without witnesses, made by a dying man who could have been confused or medicated." Nichols sighed. "Don't misunderstand me. I believe your account, but for legal purposes, it's problematic." Rodriguez leaned forward. "This isn't about prosecution anymore. Both perpetrators are dead. It's about resolution, closing a case that's remained open for 40 years, giving Tommy DeLuca's family the answers they deserve. There may be a way," Nichols said after a thoughtful pause. "A judicial finding of probable cause, not as definitive as a conviction, but it would allow the case to be officially closed, with Donato identified as the likely perpetrator." "What would that require?" "A petition to the court, presenting all the evidence. If a judge finds the evidence sufficient to establish probable cause that Donato committed the murder, they can issue a declaration to that effect. The case would be cleared by exceptional means." Rodriguez nodded. "Let's do it." Judge Harold Weinstein's chambers were wood-paneled and book-lined, with a large window overlooking Grant Park and Lake Michigan beyond. At 72, with 40 years on the bench, Weinstein had seen the evolution of Chicago's criminal justice system firsthand. He reviewed the petition carefully, occasionally glancing up at Rodriguez and Nichols seated across from him. The only sound was the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece and the occasional rustle of paper. "Fascinating case," he said finally, setting the document aside. I don't often see petitions for probable cause findings in cases this old. It's unusual, Your Honor, Nichols acknowledged. But given the circumstances, both perpetrators deceased, new evidence connecting them to the crime, and the family's need for closure, we believe it's appropriate. Weinstein turned to Rodriguez. Detective, you spoke with Mr. Donato shortly before his death. In your professional opinion, was his confession credible? Absolutely, Your Honor. He provided details only the killer would know, and his account aligns perfectly with the evidence we've uncovered. He had no reason to confess falsely at that point. He knew he was dying, and there would be no consequences for him either way. The judge nodded thoughtfully. The palm print evidence is particularly compelling. Forensic technology has come a long way since 1982. Yes, sir. Our lab was able to enhance the partial print recovered from the envelope and find a match to Donato's prints in the system. And these ledgers, Weinstein gestured to the photocopies of Calabresi's notebooks. The entry referring to TD terminated on the date of the murder, followed by a payment to MD for problem resolution. Circumstantial but persuasive when viewed alongside the other evidence. He made a few notes, then looked up. I'm prepared to issue a finding of probable cause that Michael Donato committed the murder of Thomas DeLuca on July 17, 1982, at the direction of Vincent Calabresi. This will allow the Chicago Police Department to officially close the case. Relief washed over Rodriguez. Thank you, Your Honor. I'll add a note, Weinstein continued, acknowledging the tragic circumstances that, based on the evidence, it appears DeLuca was not actually skimming for personal gain, but was saving for an engagement ring. The historical record should reflect that. As they left the courthouse, Nichols turned to Rodriguez. Congratulations, Detective. Not many cold cases get this kind of resolution. It's not about me, Rodriguez replied. It's about Tommy DeLuca and the family that's waited 40 years to know what happened to him. The Rossi family home in Bridgeport hadn't changed much since 1982. The same brick bungalow with a small front porch and meticulously maintained flower beds. American flag hanging by the door, statue of the Virgin Mary in a corner of the yard. Angela Rossi Moretti, Tommy DeLuca's niece, had grown up in this house, just a few blocks from where her uncle had lived. Rodriguez stood on the porch, case file tucked under her arm, and rang the doorbell. A woman in her mid-50s answered, her dark hair streaked with grey, her eyes, so similar to Tommy's in the crime scene photos, curious but guarded. Mrs. Moretti, I'm Detective Sophia Rodriguez, Chicago Police Department. We spoke on the phone yesterday. Recognition dawned. Yes, of course, please come in. The living room was comfortable and lived in, walls covered with family photos, spanning decades. Rodriguez noticed a black and white portrait of a young man on the mantelpiece, Tommy DeLuca, smiling in a graduation cap and gown. That's my Uncle Tommy, Angela confirmed, following Rodriguez's gaze. High school graduation, 1977, 5 years before. She trailed off. Before he was killed, Rodriguez finished gently. That's why I'm here, Mrs. Moretti. We've closed your uncle's case. Angela's hand flew to her mouth. After all this time? You found who did it? Rodriguez nodded, opening the file. Michael Donato. He worked for Vincent Calabresi, the same man your uncle worked for. Calabresi suspected your uncle of taking money from the collections, skimming. He sent Donato to investigate and eventually to kill him. Angela sank onto the sofa. My grandmother, Tommy's mother, always said it wasn't a random robbery. The police at the time insisted it was, but she knew better, said Tommy was mixed up with bad people. She was right, Rodriguez said softly, but there's something else you should know. According to Donato's confession and the evidence we've uncovered, your uncle wasn't skimming for himself. He was saving to buy an engagement ring for his girlfriend Elaine, the girl who was waiting for him at the Sox game, Angela whispered. I remember my grandmother talking about her. She came to the funeral, devastated, couldn't stop crying. Do you know what happened to her? Elaine Bradshaw. Angela shook her head. She moved away not long after. Couldn't bear to stay in Chicago, I guess. My grandmother kept in touch for a while, but eventually she gestured vaguely. Life goes on. Rodriguez handed her a copy of Judge Weinstein's finding. This makes it official. The case is closed, with Michael Donato identified as the killer. Both he and Calabresi are deceased now. Donato just yesterday, in fact. But we wanted you and your family to have answers, even after all this time. Angela read the document slowly, her fingers tracing the official seal at the bottom. My mother, Tommy's sister, she kept every newspaper clipping about his case. Followed up with the police every year on the anniversary of his death until she passed in 2015. She looked up, eyes bright with tears. She never gave up hoping for justice. In a way, she helped make this happen, Rodriguez said. Those clippings, that persistence, it kept the case alive, made sure people like me would keep looking. From a drawer in a side table, Angela retrieved a worn shoebox and placed it on the coffee table. These are all the clippings and Tommy's things, what the police returned after it happened. She lifted the lid, revealing yellowed newspaper articles carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. Beneath them were personal effects, a wallet, keys, a bull's cap faded with age. And at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, a small velvet box containing a diamond ring. Modest but beautiful, the stone catching the afternoon light. They let us keep this, Angela explained. Said it was evidence at first, but later released it to the family. My grandmother held on to it until she died, said it represented what Tommy had wanted, a future with someone he loved. Rodriguez gently touched the box. Your uncle made a choice that night, to take a shortcut through that alley so he could pick up flowers for Elaine before the game. A small, ordinary decision that ended his life. But now we know the truth about why he died. Not because he was dishonest, but because he was in love. Thank you, Angela said simply, for not letting him be forgotten. Indeed, as Rodriguez drove away from the Rossi home, she thought about the power of persistence. Kowalski's notes from 1982, Angela's mother collecting newspaper clippings, the evidence carefully preserved for decades. So many people had kept Tommy DeLuca's memory alive, refusing to let his case slide into obscurity. Justice had finally been served, not through dramatic revelations or last-minute twists, but through the patient accumulation of evidence and the steady advancement of technology. A palm print that couldn't be identified in 1982 had become the key to solving the case 40 years later. Paper records from a long-disbanded criminal organization had provided the motive and connections that completed the picture. In her rearview mirror, Chicago's skyline receded, a city transformed since Tommy's death, yet in many ways unchanged. The same streets, the same L-tracks rattling overhead, the same human dramas playing out in alleys and apartments and precinct houses. Only now, one old wrong had finally been set right, one file closed, one family given the answers they had sought for decades. Tommy DeLuca's story wasn't a mystery anymore. It was history, documented, resolved, and remembered. The Chicago Police Department's press conference room was rarely used for cold cases, especially ones 4 decades old. Yet here they were. Rodriguez, Chen, the police superintendent, and a handful of reporters from local outlets gathered to announce the official closing of Thomas DeLuca's homicide investigation. Harsh, fluorescent lights illuminated the small podium as Superintendent Marcus Williams adjusted the microphone. At 62, Williams had joined the force the same year Tommy DeLuca was killed. He'd risen through the ranks, witnessing the department's evolution, from the old-school tactics of the 1980s to the technology-driven investigations of the 2020s. Today, we're announcing the closure of a case that has remained unsolved for 40 years, Williams began, his deep voice filling the room. On July 17, 1982, Thomas DeLuca was murdered in an alley off Union Street. Thanks to the dedication of our cold case unit, particularly Detective Sofia Rodriguez, and advances in forensic technology, we now know who was responsible. Rodriguez stood to the side, uncomfortable in the spotlight but proud of what they'd accomplished. This was the public face of justice. Cameras, statements, headlines. But the true resolution had happened in quieter moments. Judge Weinstein's chambers, Angela Moretti's living room, the repository where Calabresi's records had finally yielded their secrets. Williams continued, outlining the evidence that had led to the identification of Michael Donato as the killer and Vincent Calabresi as the orchestrator. He explained how modern forensic techniques had enhanced a partial palm print from the original evidence, providing a crucial link that wasn't possible in 1982. This case demonstrates our commitment to justice, regardless of how much time has passed. Williams concluded, cold cases are never truly cold, as long as someone remembers, someone cares, and someone keeps looking for the truth. As the press conference ended and reporters dispersed, Rodriguez checked her phone. A new email had arrived from Elaine Bradshaw Morgan, Tommy DeLuca's girlfriend in 1982. After learning about the case's resolution, Angela Moretti had tracked down her uncle's former girlfriend, now living in Phoenix. The email was brief. Detective Rodriguez, Angela told me you solved Tommy's case. I'll be in Chicago next week. Would like to meet if possible. There's something you should know. Rodriguez showed the message to Chen as they walked back to the cold case unit. What do you think she wants to tell me? Chen shrugged. After 40 years? Could be anything. Maybe she has information that could have helped back then, but was too afraid to share. Maybe she just wants closure. I'll set up a meeting, Rodriguez decided. This case has been full of surprises already. What's one more? 1 week later, Rodriguez sat in a corner booth at Miller's Pub, nursing a club soda as she watched the door. The downtown restaurant was busy with the lunch crowd, a mix of office workers, shoppers, and tourists seeking shelter from the unseasonably cold May rain. At precisely noon, a woman entered, pausing to scan the room. In her early 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair cut in a stylish bob and large-framed glasses, Elaine Bradshaw Morgan carried herself with the confidence of someone who had built a successful life. Rodriguez raised a hand, catching her attention. "Detective Rodriguez?" Elaine asked, sliding into the booth. "Thank you for meeting me. Of course, and please call me Sophia." The waiter appeared, taking their orders. A Reuben sandwich for Elaine, soup and salad for Rodriguez. When he departed, an awkward silence settled between them, two strangers connected only by a